Welcome everybody. Another episode of Coffee with Korey and Jeff, and we're excited to be with you guys today. Excited to get this last episode of the dispelling the myths of digital marketing.
Yes.
Right. We've been having a really good time talking through this. It's probably one of our favorite topics because
hope everybody's getting something out of it, because I feel like we've really touched on some good stuff.
Yeah. It's as we mentioned last time. It can be a challenging endeavor, it can be a confusing endeavor, and we wanted to do this one for quite some time. We're excited we finally got to it. So it's been fun. So we have, we started off just as a refresher. We talked about some of the myths of SEO. There's a lot of myths around SEO. We probably could redo that one and spend a good hour. Hours.
Got a couple days.
There's a lot of snake oil in that world. Search engine marketing, we touched on that. SEM and some of the things, and then the last episode we were on how to build your strategy. And strategy is important because it's just like a football game. You can't just show up at the field, throw 12 guys or 11 guys on the field and just say snap snap the ball. You won't win very many games. You got to have a coordinated strategy, and you got to have your playbook right, and otherwise you spend a lot of money and really get nowhere, and then you're gonna be one of the many that says it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it definitely is a game of strategy and a game of really patience and really just a commitment to sticking with it, right? So we thought the last piece that would be really helpful is, all right, I'm in the game, I'm playing the game, I got chips out on the table. How do I know it's working? I mean, because let's be real, you might run a really good campaign and you might not, you may not be able to make the connection all the time that the phone call or the lack of phone calls or the phone calls I got are from your digital strategy, right? Right? So we wanted to talk
Even though strategy or digital is the most trackable medium, it's still not a perfect one-to-one solution.
Right. I mean, if you look at where we've come from, billboards.
Track that.
How'd you hear about me? I don't know. Just remember you. And so certainly it's very trackable. Certainly very trackable, but not always 100%. Do you know where people are coming from? So let's talk about, how do I know if I'm winning? How do we measure success? How do we measure a good digital marketing strategy? So where do we usually start with that? I mean, what's the first thing we talk through? What is some of the first tools we use? Where do we look to figure out if we're winning?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that before you even start asking that question is the tools themselves.
Yeah.
So the vendor that you're working with, or if you're someone that wants to dive into this and learn about it, you need a tool that can disseminate the information so that it's consumable in a way that you can read your metrics.
Yep.
And the best place to start there would be Google Analytics. Again, you want to spend a whole day on how to read Google Analytics. That's a job in and of itself.
Sure.
Facebook business
literally can get certified in it.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And Facebook, Google or Facebook Ad Manager, same thing.
Yep.
It's but the data is there, and then there are aggregator tools, software tools that you can use to then pull that data out and create a readable report, which is what we do for our clients, so that they can consume what all this data is telling you. Because if you just look at it, it's like Greek. I mean, it's like reading Greek. You just don't know what the heck.
Yeah, lots of data there. They're spilling it out for you. Spilling it out, but certainly you need an overlay, if you will. Something to help translate.
So that's step one. And then I think step two is then, okay, well, what data do you want to utilize from those reports? What do you want your reports to tell you?
Yeah. I just want to capture that for a second.
Yeah.
So the tool, but then the specific data points, this is probably where you're going. We call them KPIs or
key performance indicators.
Key performance indicators. What are you measuring? So let's camp on that for a second. Maybe you were, but I just want to make sure.
That's all right. Keep us on track. That's perfectly acceptable.
So what are those data points we're looking for? Like what are those specific categories we should be measuring?
Yeah. Well, number one is impressions. So impressions is the amount of exposures that the ad has provided you.
Yep.
And the best way to think about exposures is going back to the billboard analogy. You didn't know, or we don't know still today, other than the data that is provided by the media company, how many times your ad is exposed on a billboard.
Yep.
Exposures or impressions. Well, with digital marketing, we know exactly, because it's all trackable. We know that X amount of people were exposed to that ad over a
Don't use the word exposed.
Yeah, sorry. Exposed.
Well, thinking COVID.
Oh yeah, that too. That's even
my
worse.
eyes twitching.
Yeah. Sorry. Impressions. We'll call them impressions.
How many people saw your ad?
Yes. How many people saw your ad?
Which is probably, just to touch on that, as far as we were saying, is how measurable it is and how trackable it is. Back in the day, I remember buying billboard space. And the ad agency would literally report traffic literally on traffic. Like, this is the X amount of cars per day go down this road. I mean, just like super unsophisticated, right?
Very unsophisticated.
But in the digital space, probably one of the most reliable things you can actually put your finger on and measure and just say, I know for sure the platforms are very good about knowing how much traffic did I get.
Yeah.
It's a great metric.
And it shouldn't be undervalued because, again, I think I used this example in earlier videos that we've done and I use it all the time because it's so relatable, at least I think it is Geico. How many times do you see a Geico commercial that I can almost guarantee that unless you're living under a rock, as one of their ads used to say, you've seen a Geico commercial.
Yep.
And the reality is they have 100% saturation, or I almost said exposure.
It's okay. It's all right.
It's an ad conversation. So they've had penetration to the whole market. Everybody's seen a Geico commercial.
They're everywhere. Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the consumer acted on that ad at that time that the ad was seen.
Yeah.
Well, so does that mean the ad wasn't effective? Does that mean no? And that's what impressions are.
Right.
They're keeping you out there. They're keeping you aware. Your brand awareness is top of mind.
Yep. Lots
and
of impressions.
The worst thing you can do in business is what you and I call going dark.
Yep.
Like what happens if you go dark? Well, it means that you don't have any exposure, out in the marketplace.
Yep.
And so we don't want to go dark. Well, top of mind is the exact opposite of that. You are building awareness within the community.
Yeah.
And digital awareness is no different than, well, it's different in a lot of ways, but it's still the same effort, which is impressions or exposure of the ad to an audience.
And we know that most consumers, and this isn't necessarily directly relatable to healthcare or dental, but we know that most consumers typically don't act on an ad or take action with a vendor or retailer typically until like the 10th or 15th ad.
Yeah, and
it takes a lot of impressions.
I think actually that number's even gone up in the recent years.
I can imagine with the pace of ads we all get exposed to, these things are pretty good at putting stuff in front of us, so it probably is higher.
Yeah, but even if it's 15, I mean, that tells you like the amount of impressions that need to be made in order to get conversion or action.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So talking through how do we measure, how do we know we're winning? Impressions is a huge one. What's another metric, another data point we try to look at?
The cost of those impressions for the channel that you're using. Mm-hmm. And the only way to get lower cost, higher exposure is by having someone, whether it's yourself or your vendor, understand how to optimize. So the more your ad is relevant, the lower your cost of impressions, and the more of them you will receive.
Yep.
So your cost per impression is one of the values that you would place. If I can get cheaper exposure, I'm doing a good job in marketing.
Yeah. And just for our viewers, if you're interacting with a vendor or a marketing agency, they may use the term CPM. You may hear that, and that's actually that's cost per thousand. They're using the Latin root with the
Latin
M.
root,
So CPM, you're going to hear that, and that's cost per thousand impressions. So that's a term you can get used to hearing.
Mm-hmm. then the next layer down, depending on the medium, would be cost per click. So cost per click is a result of optimization as well. So you get lower cost impression and lower cost click throughs.
Yep.
Your click throughs are what would be considered, in some respects, the first layer of a conversion. Someone took the next step. Now, of course, they may call, which is also where the tracking becomes difficult.
Yep.
A lot of times when they click through, it's easy to track that. It's like, hey, we got 20 clicks from that, 1,000 impressions.
Yep.
Awesome. Oh, but we also may have gotten calls. How do we track and compare those? Well, you've got call tracking metrics, but those are very hard to narrow down to the specific channel. And so it's not a perfect science as much as people want it to be.
Yep.
But ultimately, you take all of these metrics as a guide or a benchmark towards ultimately what I like to call return on ad spend. It's not return on investment, because return on investment happens after the ad has done its job. The return on ad spend is budget, impressions, click-throughs, and the cost of those click-throughs and impressions.
Yeah.
And then, yes, by channel would be the next layer down. But then, as we talked about, by channel gets difficult because of the Geico example. Well, maybe I stopped by or I saw the Facebook ad, and maybe even I clicked through.
Yeah.
And then maybe I hit your website, but maybe I didn't visit, like a window shopper in a retail store.
Yeah.
I visited, but I didn't buy.
Yeah.
Then I move on down the road. Well, then because of remarketing, I pick up that user again, and this time that user decides to take action. They hop over to Google, and then they call your ad.
Yeah.
Which ad worked?
Yeah, totally.
So the tracking of that becomes very, very difficult by channel.
Yeah.
This is what we call multi-channel attribution. It means it's taking a measurement on not just the single channel attribution, which we would call last touch. So the last time you clicked through was on Google, and so that's the last touch.
Yep.
But we also have, with the sophistication of digital marketing, we can track in many ways, not always, but in many ways, that you were also over on Facebook maybe 3 or 4 days before.
Yeah.
And you et cetera. So which one worked on that analogy? Well, they all did.
Yeah.
So that's multi-touch attribution.
Yep.
That means that the combination, which is why we always say, look, it's more than just a single channel. It's a triad, creates multi-channel benefits, which are measured by impressions, the total exposure, and the lowest cost, because we've optimized you with the best click-through rate. And then, of course, targeting comes in.
Yeah.
And so all of those things are how we start to measure and determine our overall return on ad spend.
Yep.
So the job of a marketing campaign is to get the click or the call, and then at that point, the job isn't done for return on investment, but the job is done for return on ad spend.
Sure.
Which is why impressions are such a huge value point to measure, and which is why I think oftentimes, typically the clients that we deal with get a little frustrated because they want to see that one-to-one correlation, and it's just not there.
Yeah, especially the more complicated your strategy gets, the multi-touch attribution can get more and more complicated, right? And one of the things that we talk to our practices about, and is applicable in business in general, we certainly talk about this, is really that customer acquisition cost at the end of the day. And if the user is or our listener is thinking, holy smokes, this is a lot of data. The data certainly can be distilled down in digestible bite-size amounts for impression counts, certainly impressions on your website, impressions on ads. But if you're looking for a nice simple measuring stick as well, there's CAC, customer acquisition cost, and then really there's what in our industry we call MCAC, which is a true marketing customer acquisition cost, which really hones it down, and it says, look, I spent $10,000, I got 10 new patients, I'm spending $1,000 a patient right now, and that's not a bad place to start.
No,
that's the shallow end of the metrics, is saying I'm spending $10,000 a month, and I'm averaging 10 new bodies through the door,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a nice place to just look to as a really low bar on, is my marketing working?
Yeah. And
right?
then just
for
to,
new patients.
And just to back that up just a little bit, those 10 that you got through the door, again, good point. They may be new patients, they may be existing patients,
Mm-hmm.
but they have a value.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Right.
And that value is then backed into the spend,
Right.
As you just demonstrated. So it doesn't necessarily matter if they're a new patient or existing patient, they're contributing to the CAC.
Yep.
And then back that up a little bit further, the job of a marketer, I always say this, and I say it till I'm blue in the face, the job of a marketer, lowest cost, highest exposure,
Yep.
best chance for conversion.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were getting those 10 actual, door swings, phone rings, and you were getting those at the lowest possible cost, meaning your CAC is in really good shape, your cost of acquisition is in line with what your spend is, you're winning.
Yep.
You're winning.
That's right.
Like, it's not any more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is and it isn't.
Yeah. Okay, so
because there is no crystal ball.
Yeah. Let's swing back through those just real quick, because it is admittedly a lot of acronyms. It's pretty complicated.
You and I know what we're saying. We hope it's translating to.
Yeah. So just in a really simple way, just 30 seconds on each of those metrics, just for our viewers.
Yeah. Number one, impressions.
Okay. Impression count.
How much exposure?
How many eyeballs saw my stuff?
Yes, I keep wanting to say exposure.
Not exposure.
I'm sorry. Impressions.
Yes.
The cost of those impressions and the amount of click-throughs from those impressions. So kind of think of it as in the funnel, right?
Yep.
And then from there, it's those impressions that were clicked through on, translated into a monthly total amount of new patients or revenue, not even new patients, but revenue.
Depends on how you want to look at it.
And back that up by cost of total spend versus value per patient.
Yep.
That's really the most simple formulaic process that you can look at to say, is this working? And again, that's why I go back to, you won't be able to know necessarily by channel. You got to get that out of your brain. It's not a sequential process.
It's challenging.
But you can take those big benchmarks and then use those as, the roadmap for, if I'm spending this and I'm seeing a nice movement towards growth because I'm retaining the patients that I've worked so hard for,
right,
which have a value, and I'm generating new patients to overcome churn and hopefully get enough icing on the cake to see that growth, then you're winning.
Yeah.
But the scary part of that is if you don't do any of that, that's where it's almost, and I don't want to use scare tactics, but it's almost like the reverse of that is way scarier than not necessarily knowing 100% where the marketing is working better than the other. You have to use it as a guidepost.
Absolutely.
But if you have no guidepost at all, you're definitely not going to grow.
Yeah.
In fact, you're probably going to shrink because of churn.
Yep.
So you got to have exposure. You got to be top of mind.
Got to be out there. I think that's one of the biggest things that we run into, and I think we've mentioned this a few times in this series, is out of either misunderstanding or fear or just lack of patience, or maybe just not understanding the data, because it does get complicated even for really high level marketers, and for our practices out there. The sad thing is sometimes we see them pull the eject button and they leave the digital landscape, which is so sad, because how often are you on your phone all day? Scary amounts.
Yeah.
This is where people are. There are a multitude of benefits, and that's why I'm so personally big on top of mind, especially in healthcare and dentistry, because quite often they may not be super intent or actionable, but man, we know top of mind. You've got to stay top of mind out there, and you got to have patience. And spending that dollar, and that patient walks through the door, you just can't always make that association.
No, but
as good as your measuring tools are, you just may not be able to make that association.
What you don't know is scarier than what you do know in digital marketing. In other words, what you're going to miss if you're not there is scarier than what you can see, evaluate, measure, and grow.
Yep. Right.
So, staying in the game, evaluating the metrics, making adjustments, making refinements, but using those metrics as guideposts. And ultimately, is your business growing? You're winning.
That's right.
Is your business shrinking? Something needs to be switched. Not necessarily stopped, but switched.
Yep. So just really quickly, because we're getting low on time, but what should I expect if I've got a practice, I've hired someone to help me with my strategy and my budget and all that? What should I be expecting? I mean, for those people out there, they may be like, well, gosh, I don't get anything back from my digital marketer. What should they expect on a monthly basis? What kind of reporting, what kind of data they should be getting back? They
should get really good, easy to digest. They may not know it for the first time they see it. You may look at the report and be like, well, I don't know how to translate this. I have no context to what this means to me, how it translates to return on ad spend. But there should be a report.
Yeah, email report
on a monthly basis,
month, every couple weeks.
And I would argue monthly, because marketing does not. That's the other thing, is marketing takes time to gain the traction, and then once the traction is going, it's like a train. It's hard to get it going, and it's hard to stop it.
Yep.
And so you have to be thinking in those terms. So we look at things month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year.
Yep.
Next is, again, your marketing team should be able to have someone on call that can evaluate, especially the first couple times, of what are you looking at with this report?
Sure.
What is it telling you?
A helping hand walking through the report with you, breaking down stats, helping you understand what you're even looking at.
Yeah. And then just because a metric might be down this month from last month does not mean that the business, the marketing is failing.
Right.
So being able to properly put that into context. Well, maybe there wasn't as much traffic this month to capitalize on. Maybe it's springtime, people aren't on their phones as much, or whatever it is.
Seasonality. We know that in late November and early December, the cost of an ad to get into Google goes up, right? Your ad budget may not go as far because there's people competing for space. Now, maybe not on some of the intent-based stuff, but some of the awareness stuff, just geographically driven stuff. Cost of ads can go up. So certainly those variables are going to be in place as you see those reports.
Which is, again, month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year.
Yep.
Not day by day.
Right. And we know it takes, especially if you're a new practice, but even in a practice just to really finally making that decision to establish their brand out in the digital space, 18 months to 2 years to establish a brand consistently in the mind of a consumer. 18 months to 2 years is the average to really create top of mind awareness, because we know how many impressions it takes over and over and over and over, because we're all lambasted with marketing and messaging these days. And so that's so important for our viewers to remember, that do not pull the ripcord. Stay at it. It takes a long time.
Two analogies that come to mind that we can leave our listeners with. One is, and it's cheesy, I know, but I think to me it makes sense.
We're cheesy.
Yeah, we're cheesy anyway. It takes patience for patience.
Yep.
You got to be patient to receive those patients.
I like that.
You cannot be in a rush.
Yep.
Or if you're looking for advertising to solve your business problems, don't call us.
Yeah.
It's not going to fix things overnight.
Yeah. Because you don't have the budget, no offense, but you don't have the budget to get everybody's awareness in a month.
Yeah.
Or even in
once
5
you're
months.
in panic mode, it's not time to start advertising. It's too late.
Yep.
2 is, make sure that I talked about this in the last video. Make sure your cash burn rate, your CBR, what you're investing in your marketing, is just a standard cost of doing business. It's like your phone line. If you're having trouble writing that check, you're probably not seeing the value, and you're not really understanding how this is working for your business, and you should probably have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And then thirdly is just, simple cliche, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because when you're not marketing, you're not winning.
Yeah.
And when you're marketing, but it's not necessarily working, don't throw it out, analyze it, adjust it, and pivot.
Yeah.
And most any marketing company will much prefer to have the conversation about pivoting and figuring out how to make things work than to have you start over. Because when you start over, you're literally starting over, and you now are in threat of going dark again. So, stay in the game, work towards that growth that you're looking for.
That's right.
And adjust and pivot along the way, as opposed to, giving up. There's so many times where we've seen people, just when we used to use the one more analogy, just when we're about to, get sick because we've seen our ads so many times is just about the time somebody's paying attention to it.
That's right.
And I've seen so many people be like, it's not working. And you're like, man, if you would have hung on just a little bit longer, it was about to fire.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
great. Yeah. So that's awesome. So some helpful metrics to keep an eye on, kind of the shallow end of the metrics, but certainly the important ones that really, if you're in business and you want to be in the digital landscape, you should be familiar with those. You should get familiar with those particular, really 4 or 5 baseline metrics. And it really is a good compass. Those really are enough, at least to know if you're just burning money or if you're making headway, if things are in order and in the place they should be.
Definitely.
So, super helpful. Find a good firm, find some good measuring tools that they can provide you. You should be getting those monthly reports and really, get in the game, stay in the game, and learn how to continue to analyze the success. So, that wraps up our
good job.
Yeah, you too. Demystifying the digital landscape. Certainly hopeful that it was helpful.
Yep.
And Korey and I are always here to answer questions.
You bet.
We sure look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.